Hello and welcome to a new colour along video. Today I'm going to be colouring a picture from this Chibi Girls Coloring Book by Jade Summer. Now it's a digital version I purchased. I didn't purchase the actual book, so I've printed the image out onto a sheet of normal paper and then I've used a light tracing board to then trace that onto some watercolour paper. The reason I've done it that way is because my printer doesn't take thick cardstock, so if you want to do the same thing, your printer might take card and you might be able to print it right onto the paper, but if not, the best thing to do is just to trace it. It might sound a little bit time consuming, but it's actually quite enjoyable. It was quite therapeutic just tracing that out. It was just really simple to do. There are other methods of getting the image onto a piece of paper without using one of these light boards, but this is the easiest way and they're not very expensive. I've had mine quite a few years now and I think it was only about £20. You can obviously get really expensive ones, but I just got a cheap one and it's absolutely fine. It works brilliant for me. You just got to remember to switch the lights off in the room, because when I first got mine I thought the light was too dim and I hadn't switched the lights off in the room, so that was what the problem was. Okay, so also you must remember to use a waterproof pen, because if you don't, when you add the watercolour, the ink will run and you'll have black ink mixed in with your paint and it won't be very nice. Okay, so that's the picture all drawn out now and it's just ready for me to paint. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the background, the wallpaper on the background, and I'm going to make it a very, very light pinky purple. So I'm mixing a little bit of this Rhodonite Genuine to Daniel Smith colour and some of the Amethyst Genuine as well. Now I'm just going to test that colour on a piece of scrap paper. So I think that's maybe a little bit too dark, so I'm just adding a little bit more water because I want it super, super light. Yeah, I think that's a bit better. Okay, so I'm just going to switch to some different paints now for the rest of it. I've only done the background there and I've just received these absolutely beautiful handmade paints from a lady called Karen, she's a viewer who watches my videos and she's always left loads of lovely comments for me in the past, and she's now sent me these absolutely beautiful, beautiful paints. They're handmade watercolours, so they're like the finest quality watercolours, no fillers at all, so they're super highly pigmented. And look how generous she's sent me these 8 metallics and 20 colours in this palette here. So if you'd like to watch me unboxing these, there should be a video on my main channel and I'll put a link to it in the description below, and then you can watch me unboxing them. And I'll also leave a link to Karen's Etsy shop where she sells these if you're interested in having a look and possibly purchasing them. They're absolutely beautiful, beautiful high quality paints. Okay, so that's what I'm going to use now for the rest of this. I wouldn't normally use them in like colouring books, but because this is watercolour paper, that's why I'm going to use them. Okay, so for the grandfather clock and the set of drawers in the background, I'm going to use a really light brown, which is more like it's a yellow ochre. In this set, it's actually called brown souffle. Obviously, if you don't have the same paints as me, it'll be the yellow ochre colour. So I'm going to paint a layer. I'm going to leave the face of the clock. I'm not going to paint that. I'm just going to paint a layer. See how I'm having to water this down loads because they're so highly pigmented. I'm going to paint a layer over the whole thing except for the face of the clock. And I'm going to leave these little bits here, which I think they're little weights or something inside the clock. And then quickly before it dries, I'm going to get some of this, which is a really dark brown. And I've got a really thin brush. And I'm going to just do this, just add some streaks like this to make it look like wood. Maybe just get some of that neat paint. So I'll go across that way for those parts, and then just let that kind of seep in and do its own thing, just to give some texture to the wood. I'm just going back in with some more of this brown souffle, and I'm just dabbing it in and just letting those colours just kind of do their own thing, just like melt into one another. But I'm not putting too much detail in this because it's just in the background, and I want all the attention to be on the actual girl in the picture and not the object in the background. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same for these drawers here, and then at the very end might add a little bit more shading to those objects. This might look a little bit crazy now, but when it's dried it'll have dried a lot paler and it'll have blended out a little bit more, and it should just fade into the background. So because watercolour dries so quickly, I'm doing it section by section. So I've done that section and then quickly got the brown in before the light brown dried, and now I'll move on to the rest. Okay, so next I'm going to paint another layer of the light pink onto these stripes in the background. And so I'm just going to use this pink moon, which is very strong, and I'm using a long detail brush so it holds more paint, and it's better for painting on lines than a little short one, because a little short one you don't get much paint in your brush and you just keep having to go back for more. This holds a little bit more paint and it's easier to control. So I'm going to paint another layer over the stripe. And then when that's dry, the little tiny stripe to the side of that, I'm going to paint another layer over that. Okay, so I'm now just going to add a little bit of detail to these pieces of furniture in the background. I'm going to get some of this dark brown paint. And I'm still using this tiny little brush. And I'm just going to kind of go just underneath all the lines. And just paint a tiny little line underneath them. And these tiny little bits here, the little handles on the drawers, I'm just going to add a little bit of shading to them, so just maybe across the bottom, just across the bottom edges of them like this. It'll just make them look a little bit more three-dimensional. And then the bottom part of these bits, just like that. And then for the vertical lines, for the vertical edges, I'll just put a little line just on the inside, just like this. And then if it gets too much, like it's kind of all flooded out there, I'm just wiping the brush off on a tissue, and then the brush will absorb some of that back up, just like that. So for these little weights here on the clock, I think they're some kind of little weights, I'm mixing some of the dark brown, which is actually called Leroy Brown in my little set that I've got. Absolutely loving these paints, by the way. They've all got names of songs and they're so highly pigmented. I've got this tiny little brush and I just touch the paint like that, and look at how strong that colour is. I'm just so impressed with them. So If you want to get the same set as me, it's available on Karen's Etsy shop, and like I said before, I'll leave the link underneath. This is the first time I'm using them for a painting and I'm absolutely loving them. Okay, and I'm going to mix some Indigo Dreams in with this to make like almost a black colour. And I'm just watering that down. So I'll just put one layer in kind of a light black. And I'll just leave that to dry, and when it's dry I'm just going to add some more darker concentrated black around that to give it a bit of a 3D look. I'm also going to get this yellow pearl colour, and I'm just going to mix a little bit of the brown souffle in with that, and that's what I'm going to paint on the clock face. Now I'm going to move on to the umbrella, and I'm painting it like a deep pink, and I want the hearts to be white, but I'm just going to paint over them for now, and then I'm just going to paint them white at the end. So I'm using some of the Pink Moon, which is super strong. So I'm going to paint one layer over the whole thing except for the trim at the edge, which I'm leaving white. Now I want to get this on as quick as I can because I want to lift the highlights out while it's still wet. So I'm trying to work quite fast here, making sure it's not drying. So make sure I've got plenty on there. Now I'm getting a larger brush and I'm going to lift out, so it's just damp, this brush, it's almost dry, and I'm just going to lift out a highlight at the top there and wipe it on. Quickly rinse my brush out, dry it off again, and lift out a highlight at the top there. And I'm just going to try and tidy this up where I've gone over the edge. So I'm just going to wet that and then just dab it. Actually, I think that brush was a little bit too big, so I'm going to go back to the brush that I used to lay the paint down, and I'm going to lift out with that, and then I'm going to go to this section of the umbrella. So rinse on the brush, dry it off, and pulling out a highlight there. Just try and smooth that out. And I'm just going to do it for the top two. For the bottom two, I'm going to add more of the pink paint underneath. So we want a little bit darker at the bottom, and then I'm going to leave that to dry before I add some more layers over the top. I'm just lifting that out a bit just to try and smooth that out while it's still wet. Okay, so while that one's drying, I'm going to paint the inside of the umbrella. And I'm going to get a stronger colour, and I'm going to just drop that in at the edges here. Then I'm going to wash my brush out, dry it off, and blend this down with a damp brush. So we want it to look like a really deep colour on the inside, and then just a little bit lighter as it gets towards the edge. Now going back to the top of the umbrella, I'm just going to turn my board around like this. And we're going to get some of the deeper colour on the brush. And paint it in the edge like this. Quickly rinse the brush off, dry it off, and then you can blend that like that, and get a little bit more water on the brush, and blend that out. It's important to wet the whole thing, because if you just blend it out and then end the wetness there, eventually as it dries the colour will seep over and you'll end up with a line. So it's important to take that clear water right to the edge. Okay, so I'm going to do the same on this one. I'm going to make it even darker as we go down, because this would be kind of more shaded. So I've rinsed it off and then just added like a weaker mixture for the middle part there. And then rinse that off my brush, dry it off, and just bring it lighter up to this end. I'm just going to add a little bit more with a stronger mixture into that very edge like that. But it's important to only do it while the paint's still wet, because if the paint started to dry, it just gets all messed up. And then this bottom bit, same again, using a really deep pink. And I think I'll just colour the whole thing in the deep pink, and then just lift just a little bit back out. And it's the same process for the pink bits on this bow here, just exactly the same, lighter at the top and darker at the bottom. I've just switched to a brush that's a little bit more pointy. Just gives me a little bit more control. I was using this one, which is from Rosemary & Co, and it's a Kolinsky sable brush, but it's actually, it doesn't go to a point, it's actually damaged, but it's okay for laying down colour. But then I've switched to this is a Winsor & Newton Series 7 sable brush, and it's a lot more, you know, as you can see, I'll just dip it in the water and it goes to a point, and it's a lot easier to get in them corners. Now with a little detail brush, I'm going to get some of this deep purple colour from my palette, and I've got a clean little mixing palette. I separate all the different colours in different little palettes, so that's a good idea, so that your paints don't get mixed in with each other. It keeps your colours nice and bright. Okay, so we want a really watery mix of this, because we're going to use this to add some little shadows on the white parts. So I'm going to start with this on the top of the umbrella, and I'm just going to paint kind of like half of it like that, and just leave that bit as a highlight at the top. And then I'm going to paint some parts of this purple so that it looks like the little shadows in the white frill. And I'm just leaving some little white highlights. Okay, so that's what it looks like so far. And now I'm going to move on to the hair, and I'm going to colour the hair blue. I'm going to start with a very light layer, let it dry, and then add some darker shadows into it. So I'm going to start with the Blue Days, and I've made up a really watery mixture of that. Before I paint it on, I'm going to add some masking fluid because I want to preserve some little highlights of white in the hair. So I'm just going to drop some masking fluid there because I only need a tiny little bit, so I'll just drop some there. I'm using this little masking fluid tool, and I'm just going to add some highlights with this. And I'm adding the highlights mainly to the top of the hair because the light's coming down from the top, so this is where the lightest part will be. And then all over the hair where I think there'll be highlights, so all the places where the hair's kind of facing upwards. And it doesn't matter if you put too much on because we can always paint over it later on. So if you don't know what the masking fluid is, it's literally liquid latex, and you just put it on the bits that you want to preserve white. Then you can add your paint, and then you can peel it off, and you've got your little white bits underneath. Okay, so it's got to be absolutely completely dry, so I'm going to leave that to dry and then come back. Okay, now I'm going to paint a layer of this blue all over the hair. Okay, now I'm going to make a stronger blue, and I'm going to use the Mr. Blue Sky. And I'm going to just add a layer of this, but leave some of the lighter blue around the highlights. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is get an even darker blue. So I'm going to use the Blue Hotel, and with that I'm going to add some shading. So on the fringe I'm going to start at the bottom. I don't want to overdo it with the shading, and then I'm just going to paint some very thin lines going upwards. And then I'll also follow the lines where the artist has put those lines like that. And I'm just going to go around and paint this colour to all the parts of the hair that I think are in the shade. So that'll be all the bits of hair that are kind of facing downwards, such as the top of the fringe, that's like facing upwards, and like this little bit here is facing down. The very bottom of the fringe is facing down. So I'm just going to carry on and do the rest of the hair like that. Okay, so now I'm going to use an eraser to get the masking fluid off and see what it looks like, and then if it doesn't look right I'll make some alterations to it. Okay, so I'm just going to go in and make a few little alterations to the hair by adding just some more bits of the blue just to tidy it up, such as, I mean, if you look at the fringe, it's a bit, there's too much white there. I don't want that much white. I'm going back to this little tiny brush because I want to create like streaks, long thin streaks. now I'm just going over the little highlighted areas, and I've got a damp brush and I'm just softening that paint a little bit because it was just a little bit messy. So I'm just going in with a damp brush, rubbing on it and then dabbing it with the tissue. And next I'm adding some even darker shadows, the darkest, deepest shadows in the hair, and it'll be just some small parts of the hair, and I'm using the Indigo Dreams, I think the colour's called, Indigo Dreams paint, and just darkening those shadows. I've decided that I want the umbrella to be an even darker pink, so I'm going over with another layer, just doing the same as I did before, but this time I've added a little bit of purple in with that pink just to darken the pink a little bit. But I've just speeded this bit up because you've already seen how I layer this bit. I'm realising that this is going to end up being a 2 to 3 hour video, so I've started speeding some bits up. But I am showing what I'm doing, and then I'm just speeding up the rest of it. So next I'm moving on to the face, and I'm mixing up a skin colour myself, and I'm using 4 colours. I'm using the brown souffle, the crimson clover, the blue days and molly brown. And I just keep adding little bits of each of the colour until I get to a nice kind of tanned fleshy colour that I want. So if you want to follow along and do exactly the same as me, just look for 4 similar colours to what I'm using. The brown souffle is a yellow ochre, so in your set it might be called yellow ochre. The red, the crimson clover that I'm using is just like the perfect red. It's just like, you know, a crimsony red. The blue days that I'm using will probably be called phthalo blue. It looks like a phthalo blue. And then the molly brown looks like a burnt sienna, or possibly Venetian red. But if it seems a little bit too complicated, you might just have some other fleshy colours that you can just use without having to mix your own shade. I mean, it's not really important. You just want some kind of flesh colour. There's only a little bit of flesh. There's just the face, the hands and a little bit of the legs. So I'm just basically painting a layer of this all over the face, and then I do try and add a little bit of shading. There's actually some black smudging on that face there, unfortunately, from the pen. I accidentally smudged it right, if you can see, to the left of the mouth. there was like a stripe right across the face, so I'm hoping the paint will tone it down a little bit. So I'm just lifting out little bits of highlights from the forehead and the nose and the tops of the cheeks here. So I've obviously washed my brush and then dried it off so it's just damp, and then I'm just trying to lift these little bits out. And then I go in with the tissue just to help lift that out a little bit more. And now I'm adding some more of the mixture while the other one's still wet, just so that it makes a nice blend, and I'm adding it to the bottom of the face there, just to the insides of the eyes. It eventually fades into kind of nothing, so I do have to do a few layers of this. I'll go back to it later when it's dried and add some more layers on top. And then I've coloured the hands and the legs in the same paint, and then I do go back in later on when it's dry, as you'll see, and I add some shading to the edges of the legs and the fingers. And then here with that same fleshy colour, in fact I think I made a darker version, yeah, I've made a darker version of that fleshy colour, and I'm adding some shadow underneath the fringe. Okay, so now for the eyes, I'm starting off with a layer of the Blue Days, which is more of a turquoisey blue, and I'm just doing a very light layer all over the iris, and I'm leaving the little heart and the little circle because they're just to add little shines onto the eyes. And then I'm going in to the Blue Hotel, which is a really dark blue, and I'm just dabbing that into the edges, and because it was still wet it bled nicely like inwards and made it look like the little lines that you see in the iris of the eye, so that was quite handy that that happened. And then obviously just exactly the same with the other eye. Okay, so now I'm onto the outfit, and there's a little, she's wearing a little top underneath her dress, and I'm painting this in pale pink, and then the dress is literally going to be exactly the same as the umbrella. It's going to be the same colours. And if you can see where the artists put the lines where there's the folds in the dress, that's where the highlights are going to be. So it's the same technique as I used on the umbrella, so I'll just be lifting the highlights out while it's still wet with a damp brush, and then I'll be adding a deeper colour for the shaded areas. So I don't think I need to show you that in real time, so I'll just speed the camera up for that bit. For the frilly layers that are underneath the dress, I'm just doing in a pale pink. I'm leaving the edge of the dress white, like the bottom trim white, just like the trim on the umbrella. And now I'm just going around that underneath edge of the white bit just to add a little shadow, and I'm just doing that in a deeper pink, and that helps separate those layers of the net underneath the dress. It helps to make them all stand out. And now I'm just adding some of that purple colour into the creases of the white trim. And now for the shading on the legs and the hands, and I've just made a strong colour of that fleshy colour that I made earlier, and I'm just putting it down the sides of the legs and then blending the edges in with a clean damp brush. And now I'm just adding some little shaded parts to the hands and the fingers as well. And then I'm also blending that out with a clean brush. And then I'm adding a shadow to the tops of the legs. And that just makes that netting stand away from the legs. It looks like three-dimensional. Now I'm moving on to the carpet, and I'm painting the carpet in the same colour as the flesh. And I'm just painting one light layer all over it, and then dropping some stronger colour into the back, near the back of the room, near the wall. And then once that was dry, I coloured the little mat in a light pink, dried that off with the hairdryer, and then painted alternative rings in the darker pink. I painted the socks in a similar pink colour, and then I painted the little shoes in black. So moving on to the little cats, I painted this first one. I painted the first one in black, just a light black all over, except for the little pieces in the ears and the mouth and the little dot on the head, and then I just went in with a darker black around some of the edges, mainly the bottom edges, just to add a little bit of shadowing. For the white cat, I used a light purple and tried to add a little bit of shading with that. It wasn't really quite dark enough, that shading, so I did add some more a little later. And then for the ginger cat, I used the Molly Brown paint, and I painted a light layer again all over, and then I added some much stronger colour in for the shading across the bottom. So I've just sped this bit up with the cats because it was nothing really complicated, and I think you can still see what I'm doing even though it's going a little bit fast. So just went around the edges, the paint was still wet, rinsed my brush, dried it off and blended those edges. And then here you can see I'm adding a little bit of blue into the shading on the white cat. And then the pink on the bow and the ears. A little bit of dark pink to the bottom of the bow. And I also did the black cat and the ginger cat's ears with pink, and their mouths as well. Okay, so I'm just doing the little plant in the background. I'm just using the purple again for the shading, colouring the little hearts on it in pink. And then for the flowers, I just dotted in some pink, just in some areas, then some green, and then some red. And now I'm doing all the hats on the umbrella and the dress as well. So I'm having to use a white gouache. So I've got my gouache set out for this because gouache is opaque and you can paint light colours on top of dark colours. Now it goes on nice and white, but while it's wet the pink paint from underneath will seep through and stain it, so you do have to put a few layers on. Now I wanted the back ones to be a little bit dark anyhow. I didn't want them bright white because they're actually in the shade, so I was rubbing on that a little bit to bring some of that pink through. And then I made them lighter as they got towards the top where it's actually light. But it did take a few layers to get those white. So I'll just speed this little bit up because I think you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so the last step is to just go around and add little bits of shadowing where I think there should be shadows. So this takes quite some time as well, so I'll speed it up just a little bit, but you can still see exactly where I'm placing those shadows. Okay, so that's the finished picture. I hope you like it. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you followed along as well. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully I'll have another one of these videos up soon as possible. It takes quite a while to make them. My next one's going to be in the Autumn Scenes book by Creative Haven, so I hope you'll tune in and watch that one as well. If you want to get notifications every time I upload a new video, you just need to click the little bell icon next to the subscribe button. It does only appear if you're subscribed though, so you need to click subscribe and then you'll see the little bell icon, and then you can click the bell icon, and then you will get like emails and screen notifications when I've uploaded a new video. Okay, so as always, everything is listed in the description below. Everything that I've used, I've got affiliate links for some of those items as well. So thanks again for watching.